to my presentation on modernization and its discontents. This is for the subject ethics in communication and development, and I will be looking at Fortner's ethics development and the diffusion of innovation. So the paper I'm assessing is from the Handbook of Global Communication and Media Ethics, the first edition. And the topics I will go into, I'll start by looking at understanding modernization theory, modernization and its discontentment, ethical considerations, and communicating ethics in modernization and its discontent. Right, so let's look at understanding modernization theory first. Now, the concept of it all started with Daniel Lerner in 1958 and Wilbur Schramm in 1964. The theory was entwined with issues of development and media as a result of these two men's research. So it was developed during the Cold War era, just a few years after the Second World War, as a way to describe the relationship between the so-called developed and so-called underdeveloped countries, and what the distinguishing factors were. So, according to these two scholars, they purported that individual citizens' behaviors, for example, the drive for personal achievement or deferring gratification, so for example, getting married late, and empathy, was the primary cause of a nation's underdevelopment. So they were really looking at what they deemed as underdeveloped countries and why they were not developing at the rate that the rest were. Now, let's look at modernization and its discontentment. Now, it's important to understand discontentment meaning how people are not content, they are unhappy about modernization and the way it is being conducted. So the first one is social dislocation. This speaks to how the unity of community has been eroded, as well as the shared sense of inclusion, which no longer exists, as is usually known in the concept of Ubuntu, where people tend to do things together. There's a sense of community and belonging. And this is because of the upheaval of conventional social frameworks and standards that modernization can erode. There's also growing inequality when we speak of modernization, in as much as there is economic advancement in terms of general outlook of nations. We can also see that there has been intensified inequalities in income and widening disparity between the affluent and impoverished individuals of the world, and of course this will lead to. Then there's cultural erosion. In the face of modern lifestyle and living, the way people eat, dress, talk, you find that there's a pervasive impact on global culture, particularly on some traditional practices. And some people will not feel comfortable and grapple with feelings of cultural alienation, particularly where their cultures are not quite integrated into the up and coming cultures, so to speak. And those people will feel a sense of diluted identity. Consequently, you find people who are nostalgic for the past and therefore become reluctant to embrace the perceived uniformity that is supposed to be brought by modernization. And of course, there are environmental concerns. In this sense, economic expansion and sophisticated technology almost always come at the expense of environmental degradation, where natural resources are used to produce these technological items. And unfortunately, they leave Mother Nature in a sorrowful state of disarray. That means that, there might be digging or cutting down of plants, overutilization of water, and so on and so forth. And there's a general disregard for the environment, which evokes concern, disappointment, and discontentment, particularly amongst those who have naturally prioritized the ecological preservation and sustainability within the ecosystem. It's important also that we look at ethical considerations of modernization, and the issues surrounding that, of course, reflects the complex interplay between social, cultural, economic, and technological factors. It's important that we give time for thoughtful deliberation, dialogue, and actions or activities to address these challenges and opportunities associated with social progress. I will look at also the ethical theories and how they could help or speak to the idea of modernization, and also address the issue of discontentment. So the first one being utilitarianism, where this theory considers that they should be whatever should be done should be to the benefit of all, and that there should be equitable distribution in order that everyone benefits from modernization. Is this what happens as we watch people becoming more affluent? Does that mean that no one is left behind and everyone is happy? Now, that's a question I leave up to you. And then there's deontology, which speaks to addressing modernization and saying, do people prioritize their moral principles and rights? For example, human dignity, autonomy, and justice. Do people still have those rights protected in the event of modernization? There's also the issue of social contract ethics. In this case, you find that there's a need for just and fair social contracts so that people can enjoy their individual freedoms as well as partake in the collective responsibilities. And of course, there are some old social contracts that have been done, and so in this case, there may be the need to renegotiate these social contracts that have been put in place already so that everyone benefits, and at the same time, they also take upon the burdens of modernization equally, or should we say fairly, so that the marginalized groups are not disproportionately disadvantaged, whether it's because they have never had opportunities in the past or because they are few in number. Then I'll also look at virtue ethics. These ones, they look at fostering virtues such as adaptability, resilience, empathy, as well as social responsibility. Now, with these theories of virtue ethics, you find that virtuous behavior is promoted at both individual and societal levels, and the virtue ethics can help address the challenges and discontents associated, particularly with change in cultures. The last two are the environmental ethics, and these ones look at how are people looking after the earth. Are people considering the importance of sustainable development as well as reasonable and responsible stewardship of the natural resources we have? Addressing discontent related to modernization, of course, could include mitigating negative impacts of industrialization and urbanization on natural ecosystems, and promoting environmental justice for communities that are affected by environmental degradation. So, for example, is their water clean? Is their environment, their air, is it breathable? Those are some of the things that need to be addressed. And then lastly, and probably a bit more surprising, are the feminist ethics. These speak to how gender inequalities intersect with other social inequalities and shape the experiences of both individuals and communities. And the perspectives can inform efforts that efforts being made to address gender disparities. In the case of access to education, employment, healthcare, and political participation, and not in the sense of just voting, but also being candidates to vote, thereby addressing sources of discontentment and related to modernization. Now, finally, I will walk through how the communication of modernization and discontents can be done. And it should be done in the framework of ethical issues because, it requires thoughtful and comprehensive approach to engage the diverse stakeholders that have to do with modernization and its discontent, as well as foster meaningful dialogue or discussions. So firstly, identify what the key ethical issues are related to modernization. And then in doing that, you conduct research, you analyze the findings you get, then you clarify the values and principles that may be identified within the time of research and asking questions, identifying key ethical issues. Find out what are people's deepest values and principles. Then, after doing that, the next step would be to tailor communication to the audiences. What languages do you use? What tools? Is it necessary to have plays, dramas, or is it necessary to launch a radio channel that speaks to the community? So that is an important aspect. Of course, then you must use engaging and accessible language. It's unfortunate that most of the time academia wants to be acknowledged, and so they'll use big fancy words that no one can hear. But then if you do that, then your message does not come through. Following that, it's important to encourage dialogue and participation. So don't be like a one-way speaker where only you talk, and the people do not get a chance to respond, to ask questions, to object even to some of the things that are being said. So let's encourage dialogue. And in doing that, let people highlight solutions also, because sometimes people are aware of the problems, but at better times, you'll find that they may actually have suggestions to their solutions and alternatives to the issues faced. Also, let's look at empowering action and advocacy, which speaks to the same as highlighting solutions. And as you do that, you get to build coalitions and partnerships, whether it's community leaders or opinion leaders, whoever is stepping up to ensure that the effects of modernization do not harm these nations. So build coalitions and partnerships, and then finally always monitor and evaluate what has been done and ensure that the impact that is being received is the impact that people wanted in the first place. And then through these steps and approaches, one can effectively communicate ethical issues about modernization and discontentment. It's important to engage stakeholders of all levels, whether it's the sponsors, the donors, or the recipients, and do so in meaningful dialogue, not just on the surface or that sort of dialogue that people end up wondering if they were talked to or talked with. So make sure that there's positive change towards a more responsible and sustainable development. So that is my presentation, and I hope that not only was it concise but also comprehensive. Thank you, Dinotenda. Asante sana. Ngiyabonga.